Hey there, and welcome back to Local Marketing Secrets. I'm your host, Danny Liebrandt, and today I'm with Dan Antonelli. If you don't already know Dan, he's the founder and creative force behind Kickcharge Creative, an agency that's rebranded over 2,500 local businesses, including several nine-figure home service businesses like A1 Garage, Gettle, and more. He's the author of the Amazon bestseller Branded Not Blanded, and widely known as the guy behind the best-looking service trucks on the road. His work has dominated the Tops in Trucks awards, earning himself a spot in the HVACR Hall of Fame award, helping companies grow from six figures to eight and potentially even nine and beyond just by getting their brand right. So if you care about standing out, converting more customers, and building a brand that actually means something, this episode is for you. So without further ado, thanks for coming on the show, Dan.
Hey, what's up, Danny? Glad to be here. I appreciate it.
Definitely, man. So I want to jump straight into it of, what local businesses should be doing to build their brand. And the first thing that I'd like to cover is what are local businesses and particularly really home service companies doing wrong? I'm sure you see all the worst trucks, maybe they just have some stickers on them or, a pretty bad rap. What are most home service companies doing wrong?
Wow, that's a loaded question because there's a lot that they're not doing well, starting even just from naming, right? So naming is probably one of the biggest things we see many home service companies get wrong, literally from day one. So they start the company, they don't really understand what goes into naming, how to create a name that is more sticky, more memorable, that delivers brand promise. So quite often we see issues with naming. And then I would say you also then just see people not really investing in branding and not really understanding the role that branding plays in anchoring their marketing and making sure that their marketing has the best opportunity for success. So I'm sure, Danny, when you have a company with a great brand and you go to do their digital marketing, the ROI is going to be compounded by having a stronger brand that's well known within the community that people know, like, and trust versus, a company that's not even wrapping their trucks and no one knows they exist. And then when they show up for a paid ad, you're like, I never heard of this company. And maybe they get the click, maybe they don't get the click. But if the consumer is familiar with the brand and they've seen it, they recognized it, and they associate a promise with it, that's typically how you win, especially online, and how you can really make the marketing dollars go a lot further, for sure.
Definitely. Okay. So the first thing that you mentioned there is the name. So what do companies need to know about naming? And if they're, $1 million company, does it make sense to rename their company?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have to look at a number of different things. We probably renamed about 50 or 60 home service companies last year, ranging from, a few 100,000 in revenue to 3, 4, 5 million in revenue typically. The smaller companies are a lot more nimble and a lot easier to change the name. But, the biggest things you see that are, things that really hurt them in terms of becoming sticky and memorable for a consumer, initial based brand names are the absolute worst thing you could ever name your home service business. So, TJS Pest Control, really, really a bad idea because there's no promise that you can associate it with it. There's no visual that I can associate it with it. Compared to something, I know Viking Pest Control isn't a great example because it's a huge company, but at one time Viking was a small company. And as soon as you say Viking Pest Control and you close your eyes, you could probably imagine maybe what that logo might look like or what that image might look like, as opposed to an initial based brand name or a last name based brand name, where there isn't a visual that goes along with it. And the lack of visuals mean it typically is less memorable. So a lot of times there's many successful home service companies with a last name brand. It just takes a much longer amount of time for people to associate that last name with a specific promise. And especially if you're starting up, you don't usually have that luxury of waiting 10 years for people to understand why your last name brand means something significant to them. So wouldn't it be better as soon as you said the name to someone, they either thought of a visual, they thought of a promise, and they thought they were going to get a better job from you? That's ideally what you want to think about when it comes to home service naming. It's actually the biggest chapter in my book because I was just like, oh man, like we see so many people getting this wrong. And I was like, I wish more people read this book before they went to register their LLC, because it would save like a ton of heartache down the road. So
definitely. So then what actually goes into a good name? And something that I've seen as a kind of a recurring theme with the companies that you've worked for is there's some kind of mascot. So like you mentioned Viking, it might be a Viking or a dinosaur or, some kind of other animal like a walrus. I've seen all kinds of different animals or different kinds of people or characters. Why is that so important? Why should it be kind of mascot based?
It's not that it necessarily has to be mascot based, but it has to be a name that when you think of even just verbally saying the name, you're thinking of something positive, or the mind
Hmm.
is also processing the idea of a visual that would go with it. So we give you an example. We named the company a heating and air company called Grasshopper. For those who don't
Hmm.
know what that brand looks like, it's an HVAC company in Albany. You probably might guess what the logo looks like or have an idea of what
Hmm.
the logo might look like. So that name is significantly easier to remember than what they used to be called, which was PCM Mechanical, right? So why
Hmm.
would image comes to mind when you say PCM Mechanical? Well, nothing really. Maybe red and blue arrows if you really want to try to drill down to it. So now I might know what you do, but I don't know who you are, right? So
Hmm.
again, those visual aids help make a brand more sticky. They help the consumer to recall them later on, because that's the other reality of it. You have to understand that probably, I think they say upwards of 95 to 97% of the people who see your truck wrap on a daily basis do not actually need your service at the time that they are viewing it. And so the objective is how do I rent space in their mind so they can recall that brand name later on? And that's why, again, brand names that evoke visuals, brand names that evoke a promise or of an expectation, if I chose to hire them, those are the types of brands that tend to occupy someone's mind and be able to be recalled later on. So instead of pest control company near me, what if they actually knew the name of your pest control company and they remembered it? And they just typed that
Hmm.
in when they needed service. Is that going to be significantly less expensive to acquire that lead? And that's really the whole mindset of what we really do in terms of building brands that are disruptive, that deliver promise, and that are sticky, right? That's really the objectives of any good branding campaign.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I 100% know this firsthand because I'm looking at all the SEO data for my clients, and it's always easier to work with a company that has a lot of brand searches. So you can see very clearly, wow, this company gets, over 1,000 brand searches a month, and that's just on their main one,
Yeah.
which might be, XYZ Pest Control. And then there's different ones which are, XYZ Pest and XYZ Pest Control Service, whatever. People are searching different kinds of brand variations, but that makes SEO as a whole very easy. Google actually prefers that because they're like, oh, okay, this is a clear entity that they've established on Google. Everyone knows this is a company. They've got recurring traffic coming in. Like no matter how they're
Yep.
doing on their website pages, their homepage, which is usually the brand page, is always performing because they have that. So trust me, I know brand is huge, and we're actually looking to implement this maybe I don't know, in a few months or so, of where we can rebrand companies because it's so valuable, like
Yeah.
So relating to that, I want to jump into trucks specifically. What does a good truck look like, and what should be on there?
Well, the biggest issue you see with most truck wraps today, most of them are not delivering the ROI that they could be delivering. And it's
Hmm.
mainly, again, because foundational deficiencies, meaning that the brand that they're trying to promote on that truck wrap isn't a good brand to begin with. So you will never design an effective truck wrap unless you have a great foundation and you have a great brand to start with. So that's typically the biggest issue is people, they have this logo and they think that this logo is going to be amazing on the side of a truck. And quite often it's either not designed specifically for that medium or it's not designed well to begin with. And then there's make the common mistakes of just putting way too much content on the truck wrap, way too many visuals, too many things that distract from your branding instead of actually accentuate it. You see a lot of, especially in pest control, where people are putting dead bugs, rats, pictures of like mice and all that other stuff. And quite honestly, like we would definitely go in a much different direction. And when we've done pest control branding, we want to keep it very positive. We want to keep it not scare tactic like. I
Hmm.
don't know if like my neighbor would love seeing this van parked on my driveway showing pictures of dead animals and dead bugs and cockroaches and all those other things. So we want to keep it, as positive as we can. You can get the idea of pest control without needing to show dead bugs on the side of your truck or
Hmm.
bugs at all. So we try to take a different approach, and you see a lot of pest control companies kind of make this error where they're putting pictures of a whole bunch of bugs and mice and rats and stuff on their side of the truck. And we want to say, hey, keep it about your brand so that again it's something that's delivering that promise that looks more high end, it looks premium, it looks like a company I expect to have a higher average ticket from. Those are all this, the psychology behind the brand as well, right? So you always want to be thinking about what does the brand communicate? And a lot of times these trucks that are out on the road, they just really miss the mark. They're almost assaulting the viewer with way too much information or way too many visuals, and it actually detracts from the brand. So having a good sense of even just the fundamentals of like foreground and background, and making sure that your brand is sitting in the foreground and the elements in the background are just supporting it but not taking away from it. A lot of things like that we typically see in that particular industry where it's not done very well. And to me, that's always to me a great opportunity if you are in the pest control space and you understand the value of having a strong brand and how to integrate it. There's a high likelihood that the 10 companies you're competing against do not have a good brand. Maybe you're going up
Mm.
against some national companies on the franchise level, but you can very easily look just as good, or if not better, than some of these national companies if you invest in branding.
Definitely. I want to touch on that element of positivity. When I look at some of the designs that you guys do, that's what I think of. I feel good. It looks good. It feels like it makes sense. Like, oh, okay, wow, that stands out. That's different. And the first thing that I want to touch on here is something I've heard you talk a lot about is you have to appeal to women, that they are actually the biggest buyers in the market. Can you touch on that a little bit of why we have to appeal to women?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's over 85% of home purchasing decision making is initiated by a woman. So, does the
Wow.
brand help her feel comfortable with who is actually going to show up at her house? Does it make her feel like this company is going to be professional, honest, trustworthy? Can I let them in my home and not be worried about who's coming to my home? So, you see a lot of also just errors where people brand, or if it's a male owner, they brand it so that they like it, and maybe they've got a
Mm.
muscled superhero guy on there or something that feels that's cool to them, but maybe is a little disarming to a female demographic. So, we're always thinking about her as our primary objective. What would she think about this brand? If she knew nothing else about this company, but she saw this van parked on her neighbor's driveway, what does she think that company's getting? How does it make her feel? How does it connect to her on a more emotional level? Is it something likely that she would take an interest in observing and maybe recalling later on? That's why, again, just thinking about brands, and especially in the pest control space, some of them are quite often just, all about bugs and things like that, and not necessarily
Hmm.
something that she is going to want to connect with on a deeper level. So how can we have a brand that feels more positive, feels polished, makes her feel at ease at who's coming to her home? And those are all the bias. I mean, listen, all homeowners have bias to a certain extent against contractors. So the branding needs to speak specifically and deliberately to that bias. And how does it address that bias? How does it make them dispel the bias that they come to the table with? And again, people, I think branding is one of those words that people confuse or sort of make it out to be more than it really is. At the end of the day, branding is helping a consumer feel something about your company before you get to deliver that service. Once you're in the home and you deliver an amazing service, of course, how she feels after contributes to the brand. But at the end of the day, all good brands are trying to do, truck wraps, all your touch points, your digital marketing. It's trying to have her feel something about the experience before you actually get to deliver the experience, before you get to ring the doorbell, before she calls the call center and the call is booked. What if I can have her believe something about that experience that makes your company feel different than everyone else's? Then when she calls the call center and they tell her there's a fee to come out just to show up on the site, and she's trying to compare that to everyone else where maybe there isn't a fee to show up or something like that, right? What are we doing to make her feel that there's value in using your company versus someone else's company, right? And those are all, again, just things that brands do. Like, they make people feel something. Like, why do you think, it would be much cooler for you to drive a BMW than it would be to drive a Hyundai, right? Why is that? I
Mm.
mean, they're both going to get you probably to where you want to go, but what's the emotional connection that you have with BMW to make you believe that that experience is going to be better? It's really the same thing on a consumer level when you're dealing with home service brands. What about one brand makes you feel like you're going to get something better than the other? And because of that, I'm willing to pay a higher premium for that as well. And that's one of the things we see so often when we rebrand companies is, I usually tell every company we rebrand, I'm like, listen, just raise your prices 20% day one. And I guarantee you, you will not lose a single customer because they're going to feel like there's a reason to pay a premium for your service. So the same thing, one of the things that we see quite often is just average tickets really go up post rebrand because they look 1,000 times better than they did previously. And they were running into this obstacle of why no one would support them at that higher price point. I'm like, yeah, because you don't look like a company that deserves to be paid what you're asking. Like perception is reality, right? So all of that thing goes into what the brand communicates.
Wow. Yeah, no, that is so powerful. I didn't think of it that way. That perception is more important than reality. So if people perceive you to be the high level, this is the go-to company, they are by far better than everyone else, even though you're not necessarily the best. Like, I'm super familiar with the pest control space. All these guys think they're the best, I'm better than this guy. I know more about bugs than anyone else. Like, that's okay. But what do other people think? Because
right.
you can talk all day long, but what does that look like? Like, what are people actually thinking about your company and pushing on those feelings, like you said?
Yeah.
So totally awesome. And then also I'd like to touch on how does that affect not just your prospects and customer base, but also other elements of your company, like hiring people?
Oh yeah. It's funny. I'm doing a second edition of my book, and one of the things I'm adding to it is a section about recruitment and the effect of brand on recruitment. Because quite often, I'm sure you hear all the time from your customers that, hiring and finding good people is the hardest part of their job, right? I can't find anybody. No one wants to work for me. I can't find good people. And it's not every single time, but sometimes you look at the companies that are making these claims, maybe they're talking about on Facebook and they're on a home service page and they're saying you can't find anybody, right? And then you go look at their branding and you look at the truck that they're going to drive and you look at the uniform they're going to get and you look at their website. And I'm like, yeah, I know no one wants to work for you because it doesn't look like a company that I would want to work for, right? So what are you doing to attract, A players to your business? What about the brand is going to make them feel proud to put on a uniform and to work for you? And a lot of times the brand that they have, can't answer that question. Like, it doesn't look like a company I want to be a part of. It doesn't look like a company I'm going to be stoked to be driving this brand new van in that's wrapped and looks really professional, really high end. Those are the things that go into a potential employee's mind when they're considering who they want to work for. Of course, pay goes into it and other things go into it, but does this look like a place I want to be a part of? Does it look like a place that is also creating or has the ability to create additional opportunities for me as well? So sometimes you see when a company rebrands a cultural shift internally for the existing employees because they recognize the fact that their leadership is reinvesting back into the company. Well, why are they rebranding? Well, because we're trying to grow as a company. We're trying to create better opportunities for our people that work for us. So it also becomes a great catalyst for significant change within an organization when it's done well. And it gets people kind of excited. It even gets leadership excited or the owners excited. Sometimes they've been, somewhat complacent with their brand for years and years and years and years. And they get to a certain point and they're not really as energized about where the company is going. And you see a lot of mind shift change on a rebrand. And it wasn't what they signed up for too. And that's kind of the funny thing is people never hire us and say, hey, Dan, we want to rebrand with you guys because I want to change my mind shift, or my mindset, I should say. Right. But you see the shift that happens in everything about what they're doing. They're certainly re-engaged in this company and they're more committed. And they also just can see what happens internally after doing it that gets them super excited about, this investment that they're making.
Yeah. The word that keeps ringing in my mind is proud. That people are proud to be a customer. They're proud to be an employee. They're proud to be in the C-suite. They're proud to drive the truck. They're proud to wear the uniform. I feel like that is such a huge element. And that's really actually like the foundation of your company culture. I think it might be impossible to have amazing company culture without a great brand.
Yeah. It's a lot harder, that's for sure. But, even things like when you're trying to think about how do I get more community engagement? How do I get the community more excited about my brand? If I go to a home show, is anyone going to come to my booth? And, we've seen some great examples of people that we've done their naming for and then created their brands. And they really create this buzz that, attracts the homeowners to their booth, whether it's a mascot that the kids want to take pictures of or something that they're giving away. Like we did a garage door brand called Jolly Goat, and they used to be called, I think, Garage Door Repair Company, I think was the name of something like that. Something really like you would never remember it or, and they literally bring actual goats to the home shows, live goats. And it's just like a total magnet that Everyone
Hmm.
floods their booth because the parents want to get pictures with the goats, with their kids. And so like they're creating their own sense of top of mind awareness with that. And that goes along with the whole notion of becoming 5 Mile famous, right? So what can we as a company do to be memorable in the community that we served? And if you have a brand that's fun, that people connect with, that people want to be a part of, that want to tell their neighbors about, it's so much easier than just some of these generic brands. Listen, I would say do this as a test for the people listening, right? So if you're a pest control company today and you go on Google and you type in pest control logo or pest control logo examples, and you see a whole screen full of all these different logo examples, if your logo is up there, that's a good indication that it doesn't stick out to anyone else and it looks just like everyone else sees, a pest control to be. So think about ways in which you can have a logo that almost doesn't look like a pest control company logo, and it's more likely to be remembered at that point. So there's a lot of that too when you see even an HVAC like red and blue arrows or sun and snowflakes. Okay, like, everybody uses that. So why would I remember it if it's generic, right? So if you have a generic pest control brand, like literally if you go on Google and you see your own logo as an example, why would Mrs. Jones ever remember that? Why would she connect with that? Why would she tell her friends about it? Is it something that the kids are going to point to when your van drives by? Or is it something that just blends in with what everyone else is doing? And again, too, listen, at the end of the day, the more you blend in, the more money you spend on marketing, right? So the weaker your brand, the more money it's just going to cost you. I say in the book that the most expensive logo you'll ever buy is the one you paid the least for, because it's going to cost you in so many other areas. That's what people don't understand. Like they're like, hey, it's cool and all that I'm paying Google $1,000 or $2,000 a month on my PPC campaign, but to invest in branding, no, I'm not going to do that. Like that's stupid. Like I'm just going to go on Fiverr and get a logo for my company. And you're just like, seriously? Like, okay, so you're okay with being a slave to Google for the rest of your life, basically, instead of actually doing something that would be memorable, sticky, delivering brand promise, something that would help your average tickets, your booking rates, your close rates, right? So it makes no sense, but people get in that mindset that like, it's not something that I should invest in. I can just, do something really cheap and it'll be fine. Like it's not important. So again, usually the people who say branding isn't important are the same people that have never experienced actually what a true brand can do for their business. The people who go through the process, like they become, people that are always talking about it because they've experienced it. So I get why people who have never experienced it, maybe they don't understand it, but it blows my mind sometimes how dependent they become on paid leads instead of actually doing the work you need to become visible in the community that you serve. Like going to a home show, it takes a commitment, it takes work, right? Sponsoring the little leagues, like all these things that you can be doing instead of just throwing $1,000 or $2,000 on LSA and PPC every month. So like one thing is just paying for leads. It's not really building your brand at all. And the other is actually building your brand.
Yeah. I've heard you say that you have to build your brand before you start marketing. And that actually building a brand, like just having the branding in place is part of the marketing. Like people see your trucks around, you're involved with all these events. So especially if you're starting to become a bigger company and you're already involved with all these different things, all these different lead generation mechanisms, like, Google, Facebook ads, whatever, your brand is going to make all of those easier. It's going to make all of those cheaper.
Yeah.
So it really doesn't make sense not to do it. Something that I'd like you to touch on is the Tommy Mello story. So a lot of people are familiar with Tommy Mello in the space, and you kind of famously rebranded his company at about $30 to $40 million. Can you explain kind of how that went down and what you did for him?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think he's a great example too of someone that grew to, listen, 40 million in revenue is pretty substantial at that point.
Yeah.
And you don't have a lot of people at 40 million in revenue that say, you know what, my brand sucks. I should change everything about my branding and I should redo things. Most people at that point are going to say, everything I've done prior to this is a reason why I should continue doing it. Right. But he knew that brand didn't represent where he wanted to go. He also knew that the branding didn't represent the level of service and quality that he was providing on a daily basis. And that's really a key thing to think about. As you look at your own brand, if you have a home service company today, if you were to judge your own brand, do you think it represents what you actually provide today as a service? Or did it look like what you did when you started 5 years ago? And I think that's the disconnect you see often. So in Tommy's case, he was like, listen, this isn't like his truck wraps were really awful. It was really hard to even tell what they did as a company. The colors weren't good. It was basically black and red. Again, colors that are not really super friendly, colors that don't really connect with women. And so I looked at that. He had become sort of a fixture himself in his advertising. So I thought it was important to keep him as part of the brand. So I wanted to include
Hmm.
him as part of the branding that we would feature on the truck. But instead of being black and red, and I think it was black and red, basically was the primary brand color. I said, we're going to keep the red. I felt like the red had value because it had been repeated so often. But I said, let's introduce brown and ivory to this color so that we can warm this brand. We can make this brand feel more approachable. We can make it feel more premium. And so we rebranded that company. I think it was about 4.5 years ago. And yeah, he was at 30 or 40 million. And I think they're at 300 million in revenue or so right now. And Tommy talks listen, he does a lot to talk about the power of branding. Like since we did his brand, we've probably done 40 or 50 garage door brands since then, because he just started talking to people within that industry that didn't have an appreciation of garage door branding and why they should invest in it. And now we do a lot of garage door companies. And I think, I sort of say that that's the Tommy Mello effect, because people hear him talking about how important it was to get that branding done in the journey for A1. So yeah, it was a fun project. It actually came together very quickly. Him and I actually worked directly together on that particular brand. We made a couple adjustments to the way his mascot was depicted. I think mainly it was his hair that we had readjusted a little bit, but it was actually a pretty fun process. And I don't know if anyone's ever gotten a chance to go to his shop tour in Phoenix. I highly recommend you making a trip out there. If you happen to be out in Phoenix, just do a shop tour and you could see all of our work in his location. We branded the whole inside of that facility, all the wall wraps, all the signage. We did all his billboards and his marketing materials. But yeah, I mean, again, I think you don't see a lot of people at that level that say, I'm going to rebrand, because they look at the success they've had as the reason why they should keep it. And quite often I look at the opposite approach and I'm like, damn, like, dude, I can't believe what you've built with this brand. That's freaking amazing. That tells me that you're doing very well operationally, that you have good systems in place, you have a good team. Now I'm just like, well, shit, man, we could torch this thing, man. Let's just blow this thing up now and give it legs, give it a great brand. And, I would say the type of people that hire us are those types of people where they're doing very well operationally. They just don't look like they're doing well operationally if you were to judge them by their brand.
Yeah, definitely. So obviously, it's clear that people should rebrand, that people should have a great brand in place, like the ones that you guys have built. But I'm sure that a lot of people are probably skeptical of how much is it going to cost? Can I afford this? So how much, maybe with your agency or with other people, how much can people roughly expect to spend on rebranding?
So, you have a lot of things to consider, because it's not just the cost of getting a new logo and a new truck wrap design and some of the things that go along with it, right? So you could figure those costs to be anywhere from $15,000 to $25,000, $30,000, depending on who you're using or who you're working with. But then you've got to wrap a truck. So there's another $4,000 to do that. Then you've got to make adjustments to your website. You've got to maybe reskin your website with the new branding. You've got to get maybe new uniforms for the guys. You've got to get new marketing materials, business cards, things like that. So you have to go into it understanding that this is a big change, right? And this investment in this infrastructure, first of all, in most instances, it's obviously a one-time investment, right? So it's not like you're going to continue to buy these things every single year, right? Obviously, you'll get new trucks and things like that. I'm not talking about that. You would get that no matter what. But the investment in infrastructure year one is where it's going to cost the most. And then, but again, immediately is when you should start seeing the dividends on that. You should start seeing lowered cost per acquisitions. You should see higher booking rates. You should see better close rates, higher average tickets. So again, you start reaping the benefits of those fairly quickly, especially if you have operations dialed in, right? So now you leverage those operations and those efficiencies, right? So it just kind of really gives, I think, a boost to all those efforts, and it'll help deliver a better ROI on all your marketing spend. Like we did an example, I'll just tell you real quick a story of a company that does digital marketing in the home service space. They had worked with 25 kick charge brands. And I asked them, I said, run some numbers for me comparing 25 brands that have a kick charge brand versus 25 of your clients that do not, right? And tell me some key KPIs, right? So one of the KPIs they came back with is branded keyword searches. So on average, how many more branded keyword searches does a brand that we designed returned versus a brand that we didn't design. So this is 25. So it's a decent amount of people to compare. Basically 50 companies they're comparing. So the 25 kick charge clients were returning over 550 branded keyword searches per month versus 50 for the non-branded kick charge companies, right?
Dang.
So almost a 10x return on branded keyword searches per month. And you could attribute that to a number of things besides just the branding, but that visibility in the community is meaning people are typing in their names when they need service instead of air conditioning repair near me or something like that. So that was one thing. Then you looked at conversion rates. So they came into the website, right? How many people actually booked a call at that point, right? So then you look at a number of factors. Okay, so why would one be higher than the other, right? What would be the reason for maybe that? You could speculate on that, right? And you're in the space, so you could probably have your own conclusions on this. But the kick charge branded sites were converting at a 12% rate, and the non-kick charge brands were converting at a 6% rate. So we had double the conversions and 10 times the number of inbound traffic going to the site directly. So you want to extrapolate that further. Now you're talking about basically 50 more leads per month for a kick charge brand versus a non-kick charge brand. Just kind of showing the power of the brand and that visibility in the community and what effect that has. So the people come to the site already believe something, right? It's not like they never heard of this company. And again, they want to do business with people they know, like, and trust, right? Well, how do they know, like, and trust you? Well, they see you in the community that you're serving, right? If they've never heard of your company and the ad pops up on Google, they don't know you at that point. They've never seen your van, or they don't remember ever seeing your van. So there's no trust yet, right? So, again, like, this is all stuff you live and breathe. So I'm sure like all these data points. And I'm sure when someone comes to you with like a really like your job is going to be harder. Like you can get this dude a ton of traffic, but it's not going to convert nearly as well because the brand sucks. And that's the funny thing too is guys come down on you. They say, Danny, digital marketing companies, they suck. They're not doing anything good for me. And it's like, dude, you don't need more leads. You need to actually convert the leads that you're getting. And it's not just that your CSRs can't answer the phone right. It's probably because when the CSRs answers the phone, the customer or potential customers has no idea who you are, right? So it's not going to convert as well for someone that's invisible in the community. I mean, I know that sounds painfully obvious, but like, that's the crazy thing is like, I know you hear so many people like, my digital marketing company sucks. And I'm like, I don't know, dude, like looking at your brand, I wouldn't blame it all on them. You got to own some of this yourself.
Yeah, no, you're so right. Again, I've worked with tons of pest control companies, and it is always a nightmare. I potentially won't even work with them if their brand is that bad, where the logo is just, it's like, it's horrible. So someone made it 20 years ago and they just paid like their nephew to make it, or the website completely sucks. I mean, we can rebuild a website, but there should be some similarity. But really, the brand is the same everywhere. I was just listening to Tommy talk about that. You guys are making the door hangers, like you said, you're making the interior of his place. It's not just one thing. It's not just the website. It's not just the logo. It's not just the banner. It's every single component of the business, and really actually building something rather than just, oh, hey, we have a good website, we're going to drive a lot of traffic to it and get more customers. It's a lot of people like to think like that. That's a kind of a small term play, but if you want the long term play, then you need to be investing in brand, right?
And from your perspective, Danny, I think for any digital marketing company, even for us, when we look at someone that wants us to do their work and we know that the branding is really deficient, it's almost like, do you take the money and do the best you can and advise them, of the deficiencies? And at the end of the day, it's really up to them to decide. But it's really a kind of a hard thing because you want them to win. Like you want them to have the best opportunity to succeed. And that this is like an anchor that's going to drag everything else down. Like this is going to hurt them in so many different ways besides just their digital marketing. And it's just like, man, if we could fix this, like we could really do so much better for your marketing spend. So that $2,000 a month or $3,000 a month you want to spend on marketing, if we could carve some of that out to really get the branding done right, that budget would go so much further. You'd have better booking rates, you'd have better conversion rates, you'd have better branded keyword searches. Like all those things would just make it work so much better. Again, you don't know what you don't know either. So it's not like they did it on purpose. It's just they're not aware of the obstacles. Also, you got to remember too, Danny, like honestly, so many times no one has had this conversation with them. Like the truck wrap guy doesn't say, dude, your logo sucks, I'm not going to do your truck wrap with it. He cashes your check and he does the best he can and he moves on with his life, right? So no one's
Hmm.
having these conversations with them half the times anyway, because everyone's like, yeah, just give us your check. We'll do whatever, and instead of actually trying to say like, dude, fix this and everything will work
Yeah.
better, So it's kind of that tough line you walk. Like when we get calls from people all the time to do their truck wraps, and if it's a brand we haven't created, I won't do it because I know it's not going to work. And it's not because I'm
Yeah.
trying to sell you on the logo package. It's just that I'm not going to take money for something I know isn't going to work for you. Like, why would I do that? It's just not how we were built. So a lot of times, like you said, it's just they don't know what they don't know. And I think the more they can become educated on how, if you don't fix that foundation, none of those other things are going to work very well.
Yeah, no, exactly. You can't build half of a brand. So even, we'll come into businesses and build a website, but then the website should match the shirts that they're wearing. And then, maybe the
Yeah,
hats and the trucks and everything else
yeah,
that they're doing. So if there's not that, I'm kind of blanking on the word, but essentially if there's not that cohesion, if
yeah.
the
The
brand isn't
synergy,
the
like,
same
yeah,
everywhere, yeah, that
100%.
brand synergy, you need that.
Yeah,
So something else I wanted to make sure to touch on, which I found really interesting, is that you always are talking about keeping the brand unique. And particularly, I was listening to a podcast of yours last night, and you were saying that with companies that you will rebrand, you'll typically look at all of the biggest companies in the area, see what they're doing, and then make sure it's different from what they're doing. Can you explain like why
sure.
you do that and what that process is like?
Yeah. So again, the notion of being disruptive in your market goes along with the theory that everything that your brand should be communicating should be something that's memorable and different than what everyone else is doing. One of the simple things that people can do if they're thinking about rebranding their own company and they're thinking about maybe what would be a good color to use for my company and how should I do the truck wraps and things like that is go on, the top 5 to 10 of your competitors' websites, find pictures of their truck wraps, print them all out, put them on a screen or put them on the wall, whatever, and identify what colors are not being used. Okay, what color can you own in your particular market? So every time I see apple green and blue, I'm only thinking about your brand, not all these other companies that are similar. It's kind of one of the reasons why we're not huge fans of red, white, and blue brands, because I know that in
Hmm.
the HVAC space, almost everybody is red, white, and blue. So why would I think the consumer is going to remember my red, white, and blue when everyone else is using red, white, and blue or sun and snowflake logos or things like that? So I want to see what the brands look like and then make a recommendation as far as, hey, because everyone is doing X, Y, and Z, we're going to do something completely different. We're going to shift and do something that doesn't look anything at all like what all these other people are doing. Right. So definitely all those things aid in recognition again, because if I see this van driving towards me and I'm the only one with apple green and purple in my community, then as soon as I see that, I'm only thinking of you. I'm not thinking of the industry. Like, I don't want to see red, white, and blue or red and blue arrows and think of the HVAC industry. I want to think of
Mm.
an HVAC brand, right? So I think that that's an easy way that people can think about their own brand colors is just look what else is happening in their community and what their competitors are doing and identify where opportunities lie. So even like when we did Tommy and we said we're going to be red, brown, and ivory, there wasn't a single company in the garage door space that was using those colors. So we knew that when we embraced those colors, it wasn't going to be confused with anyone else. And there's certain markets that you can't use certain colors, because
Mm.
a huge company maybe owns that color scheme. So why would you want to pick colors that might be confused with them? That doesn't make any sense. It's not going to aid in people remembering your brand specifically. So absolutely, that's an easy thing people can do.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Yeah. And pest control, Orkin definitely has dominated red. So I don't think any pest control company should use red because Orkin's like by
Yeah,
far the
red and
biggest.
black,
Everyone knows Orkin. Yeah.
right? Red. I think they use red and black. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. Okay. Good to know. Relating to that, I want to know just in general, we've talked about it a little bit, but do you have any principles for branding a company? Like, does it have to be a bright color, friendly mascot, or just friendly in general? Like, what are the principles that you have in place for any brand that you're building?
I mean, the biggest thing that's fundamental about it is you want it to deliver a brand promise, right? So by that,
Mm.
I mean, if I judged what I'm being presented, what do I feel about the experience I might get if I hired you? Colors are obviously a part of it. We don't want to use colors for the sake of using colors. Like you can make your truck pink and purple, polka dots, and everyone would say they
Yeah.
see it, right? You would accomplish the disruption part, but you wouldn't deliver the promise part with it. So we're always thinking
Mm.
about the brands in that perspective as far as delivering promise and that is different in that particular market as well. So I can't universally say mascots are good or mascots are bad. That's going to be dependent on the specific market that the client is in. If they're in a market that's got a lot of mascots in their vertical, then I don't probably want to put another one on, and I'll have a different strategy or a different approach or a different technique that I think I can own in that particular market. So it's hard to make a blanket statement other than what I said earlier about it, but I think do your research, look at where you see opportunities, look at a way that you can develop a brand that feels very fresh, very different, very unique in your particular market. And if everyone is zigging, that's when you should be zagging. That's when you should be going in the other direction, right? So if it feels like something, and that's the thing too, is like owners have to get used to the idea of being a little bit uncomfortable about their own brand, because the natural inclination is my brand should look like what every other pest control company does. And that's the wrong way to think about it. You don't want to be viewed as what everyone else is doing. You want to be unique. And that's where sometimes they get a little scared when like, this doesn't look like a heating and air company logo, or this doesn't look like a pest control company logo. And I'm like, yeah, good. That's exactly correct. I don't want it to look like every other example of a pest control company. I want it to be unique. Like Jolly Goat Garage is very unique. It's got a goat on the side of the van. It's got a unique name. It doesn't look like the typical clip art of a garage door that's on every single other garage door company logo. That's why we did it. Right? Yeah. So getting used to the idea of that it needs and probably should feel a little unnatural is another big piece of it.
Okay, awesome. And then maybe the last thing that I'd like to touch on here is how exactly big of an opportunity is branding? And by that, I mean, like, how many people have an awesome brand right now? Is it like 10%, 1%? What will this do for your company, and how much will you stick out?
It's funny because people think like eventually there won't be any poorly branded companies out there if, we keep doing as many as we're doing on a yearly basis. And I'm like, well, listen, like we have five kickoffs a week that we typically do. And when we do the market analysis of that company and their biggest competitors, it's still really rare to have a well-branded company that they're competing against. So, I still think it's probably less than 5% of home service companies have a good brand. Maybe it's a little bit more, but I mean, you could drive down the road and you could look at, these truck wraps, and I would still say less than 5% of the truck wraps you see on the road today are well executed, mainly because the branding's poor. So I think it's still a huge opportunity. Still so many people that don't understand it, that don't invest in it. And I love that notion of it, because it's often funny to me when we do the competitive analysis and they're like, here's the top 10 guys in our market. And, maybe one of them is like 3 million, the other's 5 million, the other's 10 million. And I'm looking at these brands and I'm like, these guys at 10 million, like, oh my God, like I love it that their brand is so shitty. We're going to crush these guys because we're going to do something that's so much better than what they have. So it is kind of interesting sometimes to see in the market some of these bigger companies with really, really weak brands. And again, the way they overcome that is they overspend on their marketing because they have a brand that no one cares about. So there's a lot of opportunity for people that embrace the notion of it. And there's still not a lot of people that really understand it yet.
Yeah, awesome. And last question I have for you is, when should companies start looking into rebranding, or really, ideally they should be thinking about it from the beginning, but when does it make sense financially? Maybe they listen, they read your book, they watch all the podcasts that you've been on. They're like, okay, maybe I can kind of assemble something myself or work with an agency that costs less. But like, when can they realistically expect to rebrand their company? And like, what like revenue level, because it's fairly expensive.
Yeah. We tried to figure out, like a year ago, we tried to figure out how can we help more smaller companies do this, because we recognize it's a big investment, it's a substantial investment. Right. And so for companies that were like $1 million and under, it's a big chunk of a marketing budget for that 1 year that you're going to invest. And so we decided that we would do extended payments and basically offer financing for people that were like in that situation. And it's not financing that we're gonna run a bank report or a credit check on you and we're going to finance your purchase that way. We basically said, if you can come up with 50%, I will float the remaining balance over 12 or 18 months, because I believe in what we're selling. Like, I believe you're going to be successful. I believe I'm not going to have a problem collecting $1,000 a month for 12 months from you. And we started this about a year ago, and we got about 50 people that signed up for it after we launched it. So far, knock on wood, like we don't have a single client that has not paid their monthly amount back to us. So I'm going to put my money on the line because I believe in it working for you. But $1 million and under, I think it's a harder investment to make at that point. But you got to remember too, is the best time to rebrand is today. The longer you wait, the more expenses you're going to incur, the more costly it will be in the future. Whenever it doesn't represent who you've evolved into, is when you really should be considering rebranding, especially if you're starting to see, you're at a 10% ad spend or a 12% ad spend on your marketing. And a lot of people want to say that you got to spend 10% if you want to grow. And a lot of the people that are saying that have really shitty brands. And I know why they need to spend 10% on the marketing, right? So I think if you're really spending a lot on the marketing and you're not seeing the return that you expect to get on such a significant spend, that's typically indicative of a foundational problem with your marketing strategy, which may be rooted again in the branding. So again, does that brand represent who you are today is the question you want to ask yourself, and don't use your current success as the reason why you can't make a change. Because again, look at Tommy Mello. Did he say, well, I'm 30 million in revenue, man, everything's working beautifully, it'd be so stupid for me to change? No, he's like, no, this isn't who we are today. And that takes balls, it takes guts to do something like that. But ultimately, like, again, the effect that it had on his business was seismic. So anyway, hopefully that answers that question.
Definitely. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this has been Dan Antonelli. I think that was a great podcast. I personally learned a ton. And Dan, I just respect you so much. You're really killing it in the industry. You've been in it for about 30 years at this point. It's really incredible what you've done in the space. And I just can't say enough good things about you, because I've seen what you've done. I've seen what it does for companies, and it's really incredible. And me, especially as a digital marketing agency owner, I want to work with companies that have good brands like the ones that you're building. So awesome. And Dan, can you let people know where to find you on social media and potentially work with your company, and anything else that you'd like to plug?
Yeah, sorry, you cut off for me a little bit there, but I think you were asking how to find me, so that's fine. Yeah, you could definitely reach us at kickcharge.com. You could follow me on Facebook and just type in Dan Antonelli and you should be able to dig me up. And if you guys have questions, if you're in the process of rebranding or you want somebody to take a look at your current logo, like, I'm always happy to help. I help so many people that never actually become clients. I know a lot of people, are at that stage. Maybe they're just starting and they're looking for guidance. And if I can help somebody improve upon something that they're working on by just making some suggestions and some things to help them. Listen to Trades have been amazing to me, my family, my team. We have 60 people here, and we wouldn't be where we're at without the trade. So as much as I can give back to the trade is what I try to do. So, not everyone can become a client, but I'm happy to help anyone that has questions in any way I can help.
Awesome. And then also make sure to go get Dan's new book, Branded Not Blanded. It is a bestseller and everyone should go read it. That this is like Dan's breaking down everything. So yeah, great book as well. So thanks again for coming on the show, Dan. It's been a pleasure, and we'll stay in touch.
I'm choking. Thanks.
No, you're all good. Okay.